It was an intro video either. Oh my gosh. Good Maven morning, everybody. Hey Marlena.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. So we had was it a conversation in your group really? Like you posted about this book that I love.
Yeah, long story short, I think that I probably spend more of my time reading and listening to books. So I have this library of books I need to get to in addition to hard books. So long story short, I was listening to a book called The Courage to Be Disliked. And I was actually like taken aback because it resonated with me so strongly. A lot of the things that I think about people and life and the reason people struggle the way that they do was captured in this book. I'd never even heard of Adlerian psychology before this book, or maybe I didn't pay attention in that Psych 101 class and somebody did mention it. But not only is it something that resonates with me strongly, it's in part a large part of the approach that I take with my personal growth coaching clients. If I
Mm,
could make them all read it, I would. I totally would. And I will say this too. I listen to it on audio, and the way
mm,
the audiobook is structured, it's structured as if there's a conversation between two people is taking place. And the person who was not the expert in the story was really pushing back on a lot of the parts of the philosophy that make it really impactful. And I believe that my clients would push back in the same way. And I know many of them already do. And we really wrestle with that because they struggle with what it means to um, live their lives on their own terms,
yeah.
um, because they're constantly, sometimes even subconsciously, looking for approval from other people.
Yeah. 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 And that search for approval really changes like kind of how you are available to yourself.
Hmm.
So it's
Indeed.
like you're going for personal growth, but you kind of can't because if someone else doesn't give you their okay, then what do you do?
Indeed. I think part of that challenge, in particular for Black women, um, is layered in so many things. Because I think many of us were raised in environments where we were taught that if you focus on yourself, um, that you are somehow a bad person. Not only are you a bad person, but you were in particular labeled as selfish. Um, for me personally, I grew up being accused of being selfish all the time. Even when I didn't quite fully understand what that meant to be selfish because I thought it was normal. So I think for a lot of Black women, they struggle with that. On the other hand, I also think that um, when you look at that and you add to it the fact that gender plays such a big role in church, um, and so, with that being said, I think a lot of women also feel selfish because they believe that God has called them to be self sacrificing. And then, when you add on to that gender roles in terms of caregivers, particularly caregiving to their children, if they have aging parents, they're struggling with all of those things. And how I try to position what I do in the personal growth coaching space often is what they need is important, but your needs matter too. Because I
Mm,
personally don't believe many of them can hear right out of the gate. You need to focus on getting yourself together before you try to serve from that empty pitcher or that empty cup.
yeah.
I think for a lot of people, if I frame it as both needs are important, they can hear it. But from a branding and marketing perspective, if I talk about focus on you, it's like, oh no, I can't do that. And I'm not sure if you find that same experience with the people you work with, but really struggling to own the need to focus on and to develop themselves.
I think one of the things that happens a lot of the time, one of the concepts that I really enjoyed in the book was this idea of like jobs. Everybody has a job, right? And our jobs are complementary to each other.
Hmm.
This idea that like, well, some people may dislike you because you're not operating in the way that they would operate within their job. And they think that kind of that's the only way. But in allowing yourself and in allowing other people to do their complementary work to yours,
Yeah.
like we get like a fuller lived experience because everyone's doing things that are, coming together. So that's kind of the perspective that I kind of end up coming to it from for
Mhm.
branding. So a lot of the time, like you said, I primarily work with Black women and friends is what I say. Um, but it's definitely not unique to Black women.
For sure.
There have been so many areas in life where the idea of who you should be, what good looks like,
Mhm.
um, are given to you,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it's very hard to break out of that
Mhm.
because if you've been doing it for like 30, 40 years and suddenly you're on this like I'm supposed to be the CEO of a thing and this thing is supposed to follow my lead. But
Mhm.
the entire time, you've never really known how to lead. You've never really known how to kind of be like the aggressor for your point because you're supposed to be good. So it's
Mhm.
always kind of one of those things where we break down this idea of like, well, you want to be kind. You don't necessarily want to be good because the more you're good, you're dragged around to other
Mhm.
people's points, making you kind of like no, you're not useful. When you're not showing up as like your full integrated self,
Mhm.
you're not as useful as you can be to other people.
Mhm.
And they don't know that, which is the funny part, right? And that's
Mhm.
why they dislike you because they're like, why aren't you doing the thing that I think you should be doing?
Mhm. Mhm.
But for whatever it is to go forward, for us to be what I call co proprietors of this life, like we need to be able to be complementary instead of just like parallel all the time. It's so interesting.
Indeed, indeed. Sidebar, talking about who we work with. So in the personal growth side of what I do, I got my first male client the other day, and he was so funny. He was like, first and foremost, let me say this. He was like, there's nothing that says I don't work with men like Pink Boxes Club. He was like, can we call it green boxes? I was like, no, but it was just hilarious. With that
I
being
love
said,
it.
I kind of reframe the same message that you have, but in a slightly different way. I talk about
Mm,
how we define what is good. A lot of
yeah.
times people don't even think about what good actually means. I define
Hmm.
good largely and broadly in a way that captures these two things. What can you do with a good attitude, and
Mm,
what can you do with a good attitude consistently? Because if you are always up and down, frustrated, if you feel as if you can grin and bear it,
hmm.
then we either need to figure out what it takes to get to good attitude. And if you're going to do that, then you are not a victim of the people around you. You are making a conscious choice to be good in the way that you defined it. And if that means
Yeah.
showing up in their life in a particular way, fine. But being good does not mean you simply say yes to all things requested of you. And I think a lot
Mm,
of times we don't necessarily get that. We also sometimes forget that you can be good according to your own definition, but not good according to others. I'll give you just this personal example. My mother and I, all of my friends who know me well, know that my mother and I have an interesting relationship. It's not horrible, but it's just an interesting story. And if you ever want to hear that story, you need a lot more time than what we're going to spend on it today. With that being said, I've defined what I am okay with as my idea of being a good daughter.
mm,
It does not align with her definition of being a good daughter. I have communicated mine and I let her know, look, you have these choices you can make in terms of how we're going to interact. But
mm,
this is my definition of what it means to be a good daughter. And I understand that you are not entirely satisfied with it, but you need to understand that I am not going to change it. And
mm,
the interaction that I can give you and have with you on a regular basis with a good attitude is this. It is
mm,
up to you to choose whether or not you want that. Now, we could talk about some things within those parameters, but ultimately, I cannot give her what she wants from me and do that consistently and with a good attitude. And I think where a lot of us struggle is if we were honest with ourselves, it's not about providing ultimatums to people. It's about being really clear about what you know is the reality of a certain situation or relationship or a task that's asked of you. Look, I am
mm,
going to do that, or I'm not. If I'm not, you need to be okay with the fact that not everybody is going to be okay with you and like you. And that's the
Yep.
part that we struggle with. And then one of the things I don't think people realize, particularly in certain, I'm going to say cultures and communities, whether it's professional or personal, people don't even
Mm-hmm.
realize that they're threatening you somehow with I called it building armies, if you will. If you don't do something, not only am I going to be upset, but the other people who are aware that you won't do this are also going to be upset and dislike you. So then it's kind of bullying approach to force you to do what they want you to do. And all too
Yep.
often, we're not honest with ourselves in terms of verbalizing it, how much we do to please other people. We talk
Yeah.
about it as if, no, I'm living my life. But if we're really honest and really look at what our motivations are for lots of the things that we do, it really is about approval from other people. The part of the book that really resonated with me very strongly is this idea of all of your problems are interpersonal relationship problems, because we spend
Yep.
so much time trying to figure out how we're going to be perceived and trying to manipulate that so that the
Yeah.
other person finds us acceptable. If in fact you figure out what's important to you and what you are willing to quote unquote die on the sword for, then what you'll
Yeah.
also find is that there are going to be people who are going to naturally fall away because
Mhm.
they don't want to accept the choices you've made for yourself. And that doesn't make them a good person or a bad person. I think we
Not at
spend
all.
too much time assigning labels as well. It's just that where we're going doesn't align. It is what it is. When I see you in the street, hey, how you doing? It's not that you're good or bad. It's just this is what it takes for me to get where I want to go, to do the thing I want to do, to show up in my life consistently with a good attitude. And if I don't see a way for us being connected for me to do those things, then I have some other decisions I need to make. But I am not
Yeah.
going to be a silent victim feeling as if I don't have a choice. You choose all the time.
I love that. I love that. And it's a conversation like I have with brand a lot,
Mhm.
right? Because people are kind of thinking that they're gonna move with the whims of their client base, of the people who are talking to them about how to build and all of those different things. And it just doesn't really work, right? Unless they internalize the who they are part,
Mhm.
right? And realize that if you're having marketing problems, it is an interpersonal problem, right? You're not actually connecting with the other person because you're trying to put on this version of a voice that you think is acceptable versus like what is the real thing here. So many people have adopted their corporate voice and they don't know how to like really let go of it, unfortunately. So I think we're just so well trained, right? I
Mhm.
think we're just so well trained in all the areas where we are supposed to act like something that someone else wants and won't let go of, especially when we're in those spaces where we can be considered pet or threat.
Yeah.
Like it turns around so quickly that it's almost hard to break out of it by the time you're on your own.
Mhm.
Like, because now you're on your own. There's nobody in the background. There's no like every other week paycheck that's like supporting the fact that you are a genius out in the world,
Mhm.
right? Like now you're just a genius out in the world who needs to figure out what safety looks like as your foundation. So this idea of like being yourself when everything around you has told you not to be for so long, like it's a crazy transition that I've seen people go through. Like I was sitting with one client and we worked through her mission, made it real personal. She works with government. She works like just doing long-term research projects. And when we talked about what she could say, she was like, I can say this. I never thought I could be myself.
Mhm.
Right. Because like we're never allowed to. Like that's not what's in the best benefit to others in their minds.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it's not even really encouraged, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like from childhood on, because if you're a kid, your parents' best interest is that you're sitting quietly.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then when you're in school, like the teacher's best interest is that you follow the
The rule.
right,
Mhm.
follow the rules, follow the learning plan. There's no deviation. There's nothing that where you can come out and actually figure it out for yourself and then like come back in so everyone can be successful together. in the ways that like work together. You know what I mean? So like when we get into the branding conversation, it's always so hard to like break through that, like decolonizing your language and your voice. It's it's scary. That's really what it is. So like when you talk to people about personal growth, right? How do you help them set up systems of safety to be able to adopt this long term?
First and foremost, I think getting people to recognize how a lot of the frustration that they experience on a regular basis, a lot of the things that they are constantly just in angst over, how a lot of that has to do with the lack of internal alignment. And that part of you, you're so scattered in terms of not only what you do every day, but your routines take you away from what you say your goals are. And they often haven't even identified what their true voice is, what their brand is. They don't know themselves. They've been performing. I kind of describe it this way. My own personal growth journey, I think, is amazing. I feel like maybe you're reading my life. I told somebody, I said, for a long time, I was taking a prescription written for somebody else in terms of how I lived my life. I felt like I was doing all of these things I was supposed to do. And I started recognizing I'm doing a lot of complaining about the life I'm building. Wait a minute. I'm building this life. I mean, I'm going to work, I'm putting money, I'm doing all of the things, but this isn't really what I want. So I think first and foremost, I think most people have to have an experience that they compare, that they review rather. For instance, so one of the things I do with my clients, I have them go through this exercise called memos to myself. And when they have these negative experiences and challenges, I have them not only talk about the black and white facts about what happened in a particular situation, but to also record how they felt about those situations. Because you're going to be constantly faced with a choice. You either do what works for you, figure out what works for you, and plan your routines and your habits so that you can get there. Or what you're often doing is sacrificing to make somebody else happy. And you think it makes you noble when in fact that might be debatable. And so thinking about how is it that you're going to be clear about why you set a particular boundary. A boundary isn't about telling people to stay away from you. A boundary isn't about being angry and letting people know just how bold you are. It's not about that. It's making sure that you have enough resource, whether it's time, mental space, money, health. It is making sure that you set up your life in such a way that you have enough resource to live life again consistently and with a good attitude as you advance toward whatever matters to you. And so often one of my key tools is, hey, the last time you made this choice, backtracked on this situation, or did this, remember all of the stuff we talked about? Is reminding them that oftentimes they go around the same mountains over and over and over and over again, because the struggle is about, I want this person, these other people, I want approval and praise in those spaces. And I struggle to be honest about, if I choose approval in those spaces, I don't get approval in my own space, which is my life. And so they're often toggling between the two. And I think that comes from not only not knowing themselves well, but all too often, they don't necessarily, at least for some of my clients, and I was shocked to ask this. I asked this broadly in the Facebook group that I have just to hear what the responses were. And I must admit, I was floored. I was like, why aren't you working on the things that matter to you? And I expected people to say things like time, money. That's what I really thought, because I was going to I come up with a plan for the money and the time. And I'm just thinking like, all right, I'm gonna do this. And so many of them said, I don't know what I'm passionate about. And I think that is a function of spending so much time preoccupied with helping other people do whatever it is they want you to help them do, that you don't necessarily develop the passion that you need for what's really important to you, because you don't know what it is. It's like you don't say no, you don't set those boundaries because you don't have anything to protect. You're just okay. And then you feel as if I say no just because I don't want to, that makes me a terrible person. When in fact, you need to do that work to figure out what does matter to you. So often I try to be that mirror to force them, if you will. And I know force, you really can't make anybody do anything, but to remind them the reason we have a relationship is the fact that you were looking for a life that's different than the one that you're living. So if we're going to continue to repeat the same choices, then are you actually getting what you want from your life and recognizing that you are in fact choosing? I just don't believe in 40-year-old victims. I do not. At the end of the day, you might have to make some difficult choices, but you are still choosing. And getting people to see that is actually, frankly, really hard for people who've been programmed to think that it is their job in the world to serve every interest first, every outside interest rather first.
Yeah.
And it's really a transition process to get people to see that taking care of self is not a bad thing. I said this to somebody who called me self-centered one day. I said,
Mhm.
frankly, who else should I be centered on? I mean, think about it. I don't control anybody but me. My
No, this
life.
is your life.
So, I mean, you thought that was an insult. I actually, you got to work a little bit harder than that. Who else? Even if you have children, yeah, they need to be provided for. But until the parents are okay, the kids feel that. Absolutely. At the end of the day, a lot of us don't get clear about taking care of ourselves. And until we do that work, these other things around boundaries and goals, those things are hard to do.
Mm. I love that. I love that because I think generally we think about boundaries, we think about the things that we're trying to like create out in the world, but we're not thinking about like the foundations
Mhm,
of what's even informing
mhm.
the boundaries or anything like that. And it's funny, right? Because I think we have a lot of therapy language that's like constantly floating
Oh my
around at
God,
this
yes.
point. So, so we have people talking about, my boundaries, my this, my that, without any understanding of like the purpose of
Mhm,
having boundaries. It's not just like controlling other people or like shutting other people up, but making sure that people know how to come in,
mhm,
right? But I think so many people aren't really getting to that point. So you're right. There's a reprogramming for this idea of having boundaries, right? Like given it shall be given unto you, or what's the other one? Like there's another one where it's like you're always second, put your brother first, like all these different kinds of things. Tell your brother not to stumble. Like there's all these different kinds of things that we've been given that make us second. But I remember sitting in therapy one day, and the idea of like love your neighbor as yourself
mhm, mhm.
like became really clear to me. It's like, well, how do I love them? How do I supply anything for anybody else with my presence if my presence is always not given the attention that it needs?
Mhm, mhm.
Like there's no way for me to appropriately love them, right?
Yeah.
If I don't actually have like a foundation for what that looks like. And one of the things that I end up doing with clients to at least give them like foundation for some standards for themselves is like using their values. Like a
Mhm.
lot of the time when people are building their brands and their values, they're thinking like, well, what do I want on the wall? Like we're Amazon, right? So you go with words like partnership and authority and like those things that like don't really have personal meaning.
Mhm.
But I think going through and figuring out what the personal meaning is and like how you actually want to live your life and to be seen,
Mhm.
like adding a lot of action words to it. Like, yeah, you have your value, but also what does this look like in life? And then figure out like what actually aligns with that.
Okay.
Um, Alignment is over the past few years, it's become one of my favorite words.
Indeed.
Because if it's not aligned, like it's not that you can't learn from it, but it doesn't necessarily fit in the future you're trying to create.
Yeah, I actually look at alignment as the cinch pin, if you will. I tell people if your life plan or if your goals are this way, but your
Mhm.
routine is this way, you'll never get where you want to be. And I
I
don't
love
think
that.
we realize that in terms of alignment. Everything that you do needs to move in that direction. I created a tool called the Daily Give, and it's a
Hmm.
series of questions. And the whole purpose of that, really and truly, in its essence, is to get people to say, if my goal is this, how is my routine getting me there? Even if I'm
Mm,
moving slowly, if my routine isn't getting me there, then I need to either rethink the goal or rethink the routine, or stop being a victim and accept you don't plan to move. I don't believe you don't have a choice. You're just not wanting to say out loud, I'm not planning to move.
right.
And I don't think people get that. I told somebody, I said, I had my own moment about having to be honest about my routine. This was some years ago. I was an avid runner and
Hmm.
I was running 5 miles every day. I mean, I was doing the thing. I hit my goal weight, all of that. But every day I would slide by Chick-fil-A and I would
Mm.
get the ice cream in the cup and waffle fries. It's something about that sweet and salty that's fantastic. And then
It's a combination for the ages.
yes, it is. And there's a park around the corner. I would go over there, sit there, watch the ducks, and eat my ice cream and French fries. And one day I had to ask myself, what is the real goal here? Because clearly it's not healthy if you're doing this every day. The goal for you is thin, it's not healthy, even though to some people they look the same. And what we have to really get clear about is what are you doing that's supporting your goal? And when you look at what you're doing consistently, the things that you keep doing, where is that taking you? And is that where you want to be? I'm not saying where
Mm.
you want to be is good or bad, but you need to see that's where you're going and you need to make a
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. How do you, when people bump up on that, right? Where, maybe it's their rock bottom, or maybe they've like finally realized that they are operating in opposition to, the wants. Like, how do you help them to kind of begin moving in the other direction, knowing that it's unfamiliar territory?
A couple of things. First, I give people an opportunity to grieve. Sometimes when you realize you've been living your life in a way that it's really counter to what you really value, as you uncover those values, and then you realize perhaps how much time you could have invested in what really matters to you, how much money, how much energy perhaps you could have spent there, or maybe even the things you've lost or given away because you didn't see how they could help you, maybe I give you time to
Yeah.
just really own how painful that can be. I
Yeah.
think we want to gloss over the grief sometimes of our lives. We frame grief about death, but frankly, a lot of times grief is about what happens when you change. It is about what you're leaving behind, and I give people space to do that. Really, just that is difficult. I need to own that. But what I also, in fact, help you to do is to think about how you do have whatever time, energy, whatever the thing you think you lack or that you've already used up, you still have that. I often say in one of my, the way I tend to work with clients early on, I try to move them to this place where I get them to believe that they have within themselves what it takes to actually turn the ship of their lives. It just has
Mm.
to be done with commitment that lends to habits that are frankly about being consistent. And they have to be willing to do the dreaming, to do the changing. And so as I worked on that mindset, I pushed them to identify 1 to 2 things, ideally one. But some people they really think they can do 2. I prefer 1, and I call it the anchor habit approach.
Mm.
I look at them, I get them to look at their lives in 3 particular buckets. How are you doing personally, professionally, physically? Meaning not only your physical health, your mental health, your style, appearance, all things body. And what I try to get them to do is to look at those 3 areas of their life and choose one thing that's really important to them. And I call it the anchor habit because part of what I work with them to do is to figure out how to build their life or rebuild their life rather in such a way where they don't compromise on that value without having a really strong reason. So let's take the running thing. I use that a lot. Whether it's running or exercise, a lot of my clients really talk about the physical health piece because I tend to focus on middle-aged women. And
Mhm.
it's in that place where they're like, oh my God, the menopause weight and my blood pressure numbers, I was diagnosed with this. And that's okay, got it. You also diagnosed with that kitchen in there, but that's a whole nother story. I mean,
Mylena.
I'm just saying, I grew up in a household where everything was fried, girl. Even the ice, everything was fried. I mean, my grandma would bread that. I'm kidding.
I love it. Fried ice.
for girl. It would have been good too if she made it. I mean, my grandmother can make anything taste good. But
Right.
one of the things I try to get them to do, frankly, um, as they're looking at this anchor habit, is how to protect it and how to build their life around it. So let's say if it's really about exercise, or maybe you can even say exercise or getting up early because they want to write in the morning. They got a book or something they want to do. So let's say your thing is you need to be up by 5 a.m. because when you look at your life, in order to be able to spend some good focused time on a regular basis, you need to be up by 5 so you can be at your desk by 5:30. That means we need to backtrack your life such that you can get into bed by 9 o'clock. So if you're going to get in bed by 9 o'clock, let's say you have whatever you got to do in the evenings from the time you get off at 4 to going to bed at 9 o'clock. You can't solve the world between 4 and 9. So then it becomes what's really important to you. We're going to have to make some difficult choices about reductions and cuts. And part of what I do with that, I include as a part of the services with my coaching thing is conflict coaching. Is teaching you how to have conversations with the people in your life, because what you're going to do when you go into your family members, your good friends, the organizations you are part of, and you're telling them about these new choices you're making, here's what they hear. You tearing up my life. Wait a minute. And so with that is helping people to anticipate those uncomfortable conversations and figuring out how to navigate them so that the conversation doesn't come across in a way where now you're inviting unnecessary conflict. You're already going to have some just because change brings it. But you're renegotiating the terms of agreement in terms of how you're showing up in the lives of the people around you. I'm working through that, getting you to see that as normal and it's okay. And there's a path forward. We don't have to fix it today, but the idea that we won't do anything is also unacceptable, and helping people work through that and to stop fearing that the people in their lives cannot adapt, that the people in their lives are so helpless that if they make any changes that everything is going to hell. No, you don't have to believe that. You do not have to believe that. You need to do some work first so that you deal with your own fears around change, that you adopt to what it is that you like to do. And then we work on how you communicate that to the people in your life and in your community or whatever you're focused on, so that they see that they can buy into your success, your happiness. And frankly, that makes all of us a little bit better when none of us is feeling like we are sitting around silently doing things we don't want to do because that resentment builds up. Whereas you talked about in one of your therapy sessions, love thy neighbor as thyself, how that resonated with you. How I really think about it, God loves a cheerful giver, no matter what it is you're giving. If you are the resentful giver, how about you hold it until you come up with a philosophy or a narrative that allows you to do whatever it is you do with a good spirit, not a tit for tat because you owe me. That's not the spirit of cheerfulness. That's not the spirit of the God that you told me you were trying to align with. And look at how you can live your life so that no part of how you live and how you think contradicts not only your full value system, but also the things that you do to get to where you want to go. And how do you build community so that the people in your life don't always worry about how you're going to react or how you're going to treat them in the sense of feeling like they're a burden. I mean, what if you saw sharing your boundaries with people? You don't have to say this is boundary A, B, or C, but sharing with people what you need and how they can help and what that allows you to do if they show up that way. Just think about how you can change the narrative, not only for yourself, but for them. And I don't think we think that through enough. It's too black and white in the sense that it's either this or that. We're often too caught up in deciding which things are good or bad, when ultimately it's, no, this is where I'd like to go. And this is what I need help with. Or this, and that could mean you take this off my plate, or we change this, and I'd like to take you with me. Those things are not incompatible. And I think people have to have the courage to believe, first and foremost, that they are entitled to have more of their lives for themselves. You can spend time, energy, money, all of the things on you and still love other people.
I love that. Have the courage to believe that more of their life is like entitled to themselves. That's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And you're right. Like there's so little it's the inner conflict, right?
Mhm.
Like right now we're talking about the external conflict, like you bring this new version of yourself to people who are used to capitalizing on the old version of yourself. And when I say capitalizing, I don't even mean that they're doing it maliciously, but they have a program that they understand about you and about your boundaries and about like what you will allow and what they can do with you, right? um, Neither good nor bad, just neutral statement. um, but then there's the internal conflict, right? Where like you can do the thing, you can present your boundaries and they can actually be well accepted, but because you're not used to this change, you're not used to this version of yourself, like how do you help them to get the reps in to move through the internal conflict?
Gotcha. To me, that takes us back. As a matter of fact, I'm doing a couple things. It takes us back in part to the memos to myself approach.
Mm-hmm.
I find that when people are struggling to consistently show up as a new version of themselves, um, it's because they've lost sight of why the new version is necessary, why the new version is
Mm-hmm.
important. So helping them to remember that. It's because we all do that whenever you're making any sort of change. Changing is hard because what happens, you've gotten into a flow with that thing. I mean, think
Mm-hmm.
about your morning routine. Most mornings when I hit the ground, now here's what's weird. Some mornings I catch myself making coffee and I don't even want the coffee. It's just a part of my routine. And so thinking about how is it that you're restructuring your routine, because what happens, the way the brain works, and yes, I even have these discussions about how the brain works. Your brain likes to
You
go on
have to.
autopilot. Essentially, we want to figure out what we can do because then we don't have to spend energy thinking about it. We can just do it. And a lot of us don't realize how much of our lives we are living on autopilot. So when people are struggling to show up, it's reminding them that occasional setbacks and relapses are normal. And
Mm-hmm.
what helps us stay focused is we know why we made the change in the first place. And the reason we also stay focused is we recognize that if we relapse too much, then we're going to go back to that place that caused you to reach out to me in the first place. And we have to recognize, frankly, that the work that we're doing for ourselves is just that, it's work. It's not this thing where you sprinkle pixie dust over your life or fairy dust and it's done because you had a decision, this ahas take work. I think there's an African proverb that says, well, when you pray, then move your feet.
That
Um,
part.
yeah, and I think we don't realize that sometimes working on us is the moving our feet part.
Yeah.
It's looking at whether you're doing the work, and it's about consistency to other people. Because if I come to you and renegotiate, so to speak, and we talk about all these changes, and then I'm sitting around going, okay, I told Olivia that we were going to do all of these things. And Olivia is doing as much as she can. But then Olivia sees me backtracking. I also recognize that the people in my life are watching that, and it shouldn't turn into pressure. But recognizing
Mm-hmm.
when you backtrack, a lot of backtracking happens, and you're having to realign over and over and over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with that, but in time, that becomes exhausting. So that also helps you with the discipline of it. I mean, ultimately you have to decide that you're worth the work and that you're
Mm-hmm.
tired of whatever it is that drove you to look for coaching, consulting, whatever it is that you're reaching out for somebody to help you with, whether in your case it's branding, whether it's a particular project that they're working on that they want to get to with their business, or frankly they want to change the way they live in some major way. You've
Yeah.
got to really keep in mind what drove you to that place. I even see it, and I point it out sometimes in very simple ways. In my personal girlfriend group, there's this one woman in our group. I love how well she knows me. So we have this circle that we're in, and people sometimes complain a lot. And one time she says to this person, she said, "Hey, I just want to point out, whenever you bring this up, you notice that one over there talking about me, how her body language changes." She says, she hit the wall when she feels like you keep talking about something as if it's problematic, but you don't change anything. And we have to get to that point with ourselves. Um, I'm complaining about my weight. I'm complaining about my career. I'm complaining about my relationships with my husband, my children, my parents, my friends. I'm not working on anything that I feel particularly passionate about. And yes, that's a heavy lift to figure out what you want to do. But you know what's also a heavy lift? Being stuck every day and recognizing, if you're honest with yourself, that you're choosing to be stuck. So
I love it.
you're gonna lift regardless. So decide what you're gonna pick up.
You're gonna lift regardless. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
you
good
are.
imagery, right? Like it's because you're gonna have to pick something up. What's it gonna be? Is it gonna be the pain of change, or is it gonna be the pain of staying the same?
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and I think when people see that, particularly for in the complaining space, that's just my pet peeve. If you want to really get my goat complain a lot, you're complaining about the same thing over and over and over and over again. I want to liberate you to say you own that. Look, this is where I want to be. And I don't need to seek approval from you by complaining about it. I think a lot of times we don't recognize when we see those patterns and habits where somebody's always upset, always complaining. Sometimes people, they don't even recognize the subtle twistedness in their thinking. You know, you're talking about this problem or this situation that you're in, but you're talking about it from a martyr angle. You want us to praise you for the sacrifice. You want to be acknowledged for all that you do. Even though it may not seem like it on the surface, you are being rewarded for that. And it's okay. You are getting a reward. I think about it like this when I see people who are caretakers. Oh, you know, I did this for mama. I did this when they were sick. I did all of this. And now nobody's acknowledging me. Mama died and she left somebody else in charge of the funeral. I wasn't even worried to make the arrangements. I gave up my whole life. Okay, I get it. But first and foremost, did you give up your life or did you not have anything else on your agenda? Let's be honest. So you didn't give up anything. You had nothing else filling that space. So you said yes to work you later learned you didn't want to do. And now you're mad at everybody else. And then when you realized that you were feeling burnt out and frustrated, did you say anything? But you want to make the people around you responsible for your unhappiness. It does not work that way. Nobody owes you a cookie for the pain in your life if you don't speak up, if you don't say something for yourself. I think Zora Neale Hurston said, if you don't speak up about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it. I mean, ultimately, so many of us have to be honest too, where again, about that interpersonal relationship thing. You wanted to be praised and you got it. And now you want something else. I mean, why don't you just say you want to be acknowledged for all that you did rather than saying you gave up things so we can, you know, get you a cake and do that. And then we can find something else to do. But ultimately, yes, get you a cake. Let's do this. Mama's repast is also your party. You know what? You gave up everything. I'm glad you did it. That's great. I think it's fantastic. It's not that I don't love my mama, but I realize because you lived there, because you did all of these things, that I was able to live and do other things without having to worry about it. And I'm glad you did that. I know in part that it was hard, but I also want to give you your flowers too. And let's be honest, that's really what you want right now. Now, I'm not going to be giving you flowers 3 years from now, but, you know, because you're not going to just make me forever indebted to you. And that's also part of the reason why thinking about what it is that we want to do, that we can do joyfully and consistently is important, because at some point, we can't hold those things over people's heads too. You choose to show up in ways, and nobody is forever indebted to you.
I love it. I love it. It's so true, right? Like he did something that he didn't choose to do. And then in the end, when he had resentment because he chose to do it, it's because he wasn't it's because he wasn't leaning on the idea that like he had a choice.
You always have a choice.
Man,
You
you
always
always have a choice.
You always have. It may be a choice that you think is difficult, but you still have a choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's such an easy one, right? Where it's like obviously you take care of your ailing parent and whatever, because the people around are probably like saying that this is the obvious choice as well. And they have this idea that you are just going to do it. instead of being there to support, yeah, there is always a choice.
There is. I mean, if we stuck with the story about the ailing parent, there's
Mm,
always a choice. Now, you might go, well, what if I'm a person who doesn't have a lot of resources? The people in my family can't help out. I
mhm,
get that. What that might mean is that we might need to spend some time thinking about, okay, what are other respite services and things you can do to work this into your life? Thinking
mhm.
about perhaps there's a network of people that could even help you if finances are a challenge. But this whole idea that I am completely stuck, I generally, even though it can be exhausting to look for options to some people, I just don't believe in this idea, just on a principle level, of feeling as if I have no choice. I don't believe in the idea of powerlessness, because once you
Mm,
buy into that, then life becomes harder on a whole nother level. So, with that, I
yeah.
am going to look for some things to lighten my load. It has nothing to do with whether or not I love that other person. It's about I love me too. So with that,
Mhm,
whether I can talk to my sister friend from church, hey, can you come sit with mama for a couple days? I had a cousin, to give you an example, when her mother was dying, my aunt had cancer. It was my favorite aunt, actually. And she talked about how she couldn't do anything while auntie was dying. And she said, well, if I go somewhere, she might die when I'm gone. I said, well, she might die while you're here too. Um, and ultimately, this same cousin, 50, heart attack. Honey, I get it. You've got to find ways to insert some space for yourself into your life, no matter what it is you're doing. You have to find space. Yes, you love your other person, but setting yourself on fire to keep everybody else warm is not always the best decision. And you've got to give up the guilt associated with being whatever you think somebody that external version of good is, and sometimes even your own internal version of good as well. You've got to rethink that. But yeah, I just think ultimately we've got to dispense with this idea that we owe people the whole of who we are. I believe there's certain things we only owe to God, and I think we have to remember that.
I love it. I love it. Give up the guilt.
You have to give it up. Indeed. I think as you talk about giving up the guilt, I think that goes hand in hand with the courage to be disliked. I would say give up the guilt and then also give up fear tactics. How many of us have heard things like, the same people you pass going up, you pass them when you're falling down? I think people, apparently that might be a Southern thing. I used to hear that a lot when I was growing up in
I've,
my family.
I've heard it. It's the I love when you just you slide into that.
Yeah. And the reason I bring that kind of thing up is because, again, subtle threats to make you think if you go after what's important to you, we're going to
Mhm.
remember that when you need us. And what
Mhm.
I say to people who say that to me, well, that must mean you never loved me in the first place if you want me to live my life in a way that I'm not happy. And even if I do fall, you mean to tell me you're going to withdraw your love, the love that you claim you have, so that I can hit the ground really hard? Is that really what we're talking about here? Why don't
Mhm.
we talk about what it is that you really want here? And that is, you want to control me. You want me
Yeah.
to do what it is you want me to do, so that you can, that's what it takes for you to be happy with me in our relationship. And if that doesn't sync with who I am, with what I want to do, now we have conflict that often isn't necessary. How about you respect who I am, and I'll do the same in turn? And here's the other piece too. Sometimes you might find that there is no middle ground with certain things, and it doesn't necessarily mean
Mhm.
that you completely walk away from that relationship either. In that case, there's this beautiful concept called distance. I love you every single day, but I talk to you once every 2 weeks. You've got to think about what that actually looks like. And to me, that goes back to this defining what good is, defining
Mhm.
how you can show up consistently and with the good spirit. And when you notice those consistent or regularly occurring friction points in your life, don't just give in to the emotional angst of the moment. Figure out, what is it that's driving me nuts about this? And what can I do to create a habit around it, to create some new behaviors around it, so that I can deal with it? Because the reality is, there are some people you aren't going to cut off. You don't want to. And it's okay. Just figure out how to show up consistently and with a good attitude about it. I'll share this and then I'll stop asking, talking about this particular topic. I had one client who struggled with a relative who had addiction issues. Mm. And this person was having to think like, I don't want to be an enabler. I don't want to be an enabler. And as she thought about how she was going to set boundaries, what she decided was what she was willing to do. And she was willing to do those things regarding that relative without complaining about it anymore. She's like, this is what I'm going to do. Some people might see it as enabling. Some people may not, but this is how I want to show up in this person's life. And for her, it meant taking over a part of that person's financial affairs. Beyond this, she's like, nope, I'm done. Whatever else you want to do, that's on you. And it allowed her to balance her idea of what it meant to be a good daughter, how she could show up consistently. Did the other people see her behaviors and her choices in the same way? No. But guess what? At some point, you got to decide, are you going to keep living in this cycle for other people where you're constantly unhappy, frustrated, and complaining? Or do you make a decision that you can live with and you move on with the other parts of your life?
I love that. Because that's the bottom line for everything.
It really is.
Yeah, seriously. Just the courage to actually take yourself seriously, right? Like, and the funny thing is, the book after The Courage to Be Disliked is The Courage to Be Happy, where the same young man comes and he's asking the questions about kind of the application, because he goes out and starts thinking that this is more selfish than it is something that can actually be used and profited from, right? But then the wise counselor eventually had to have him realize that if you're giving yourself enough, then you have enough for everybody else. And like, that is really just what needs to happen, because if you don't, then you're going to burn out and you're going to be sad that you burned out. And then you're going to have questions about it. And then there's going to be nothing coming back to you because of the decisions that you made.
Indeed. I think for me, what gave me the courage, there were two things that gave me the courage to start to live my life on my own terms, in short, to seek happiness. I realized, this was shortly after I turned 40. I went to Jamaica, partied it up with my cousins. My cousins are a riot. Trust me, if we're somewhere together, it's a good time is going down. Love it. And then when I got back, I wrote my obituary. I know you're like, wait a minute, you came back from a party in the Caribbean and wrote your obituary. Yes.
But this is why you're my people, because I'm always writing a postmortem for like something. I'm like, just in case, like, what would this look like?
I cried over myself for 3 days. I was devastated. Oh God, this is not it. I mean, when I say and when I put the pictures in it, I fell out again. Oh God. I mean, I was traumatized. But the reason that it was so devastating, I realized I had lived for 40 years, but I had done many of the things that were really important to me. I had done the things my family thought I should do. I was good on that. The only thing I didn't do that they still question, we ain't got no babies yet. Like, seriously, what is your problem? Like, are you well? Are you having female problems? I mean, my family's gangster. They don't mean no harm, but little my family, not even one. Aside from that, I think they're pretty happy with me. But I think I wasn't happy with me. And it took me a long time. I even bought a house because I didn't want a house. But in my family, nobody buys a condo or a row house. My uncle's like, people do that on purpose? I bought a single family house because I knew that would make them proud. That's what we do in our family. I hated yard work. I mean, and so much of my life at that point, I realized I was living based on a formula. This is what I thought I was supposed to do. And I decided I couldn't keep living that way. I didn't want to feel like I was talking to God saying, I have been alive for 40 years, but I haven't lived. So, and part of that was realizing that I could do things that allow me community in the way that I had grown up defining community. And the community had rarely served me. And I don't mean back to me. I mean, I was always on the team. I was always doing my part, but I often walked away unfulfilled. And the reality is you can live for the community, but how about instead of that, you live for yourself and contribute to the community? If you change your thinking and put the community in its place, so to speak, at least I was better for it. And when I started to think about that, it made me less judgmental about the people in our community, in our family who didn't do the things that other people judge them for, because I realized my job isn't to control them. My job isn't to define how they should live their lives. It's That's not my work. That's not my job. My job is to take care of this person right here, and I care about the people who are around me and how I can show up in their lives with a good attitude and consistently. I can give this, I can offer this. I want to be in your life in this particular way.
Mm.
But to constantly give you unsolicited advice, which is really low key me telling you what to do,
Right.
threatening you if you don't show up, me telling you how a good person, bad person, it's not serving me. And frankly, when I look at your life, it didn't serve you either. And so with that, just being willing to be honest about we're doing a lot of things. A lot of us are very busy, but we aren't necessarily winning.
Mm. We're gonna end on that. That's the one. That is the one. Doing a lot of things, but not necessarily winning. I love it. Mylena, thank you for talking to me. And like,
Indeed,
especially for this random conversation. I appreciate it so much.
indeed, no problem. I was so glad that you wanted to talk about the book, because sometimes my fascination with books, I like these kinds of leadership and introspective books and autobiographies. And I think most people are, when I talk about the books, unless I'm talking about something salacious that I've read in a biography, I don't think people really feel me. And the way you respond, I was like, oh, I found good people. She loves
Listen, I love a good like subversive title. It's gonna
Yeah,
help me to, you know, I don't know, stick it to the man. Anyway,
you're sticking it to the man. I'm done.
so where in the world of the internet can we find you, and where in the world can we find you?
MylenaSutton.com. My name is also my website, and it takes you to both sides of my business, the leadership consulting work that I do for B2B clients, as well as Pink Boxes Club, and that's the work that I do for personal growth clients. So MylenaSutton.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome, awesome. All right, Mylena, thank you again for being here, and we're gonna have to do it again, obviously. When you get to the next book, or oh, we can just do books. I love books, so we can do this again for sure.
That'll work. I hope you do it.
Awesome. All right, Pete. See ya. Thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Indeed. Goodbye now.